Businessmen, bouncers, a PI, a police officer, an alleged steroid drug dealer and members of the 27's gang.
Underworld boss Mark Lifman was gunned down on Sunday in the parking lot of Garden Route Mall in Georgia.
No matter what, nobody deserves to die like that, being gunned down.
18 August 2017, Constantia, Cape Town. Midnight drapes a wealthy suburb in silence. Inside a gated mansion, a family sleeps. Without warning, shadows move through the house, armed intruders slipping past security. They creep into the master bedroom where a man lies in bed beside his wife. In an instant, the dark stillness erupts into violence. Muzzle flashes light up the room. The man awakens to searing pain as bullets tear into him. His wife's scream pierces the night. A child down the hall starts crying. The assassins vanish as quickly as they came, leaving the wife and young child to watch in horror as life drains from the man on the bed. The victim was Brian Weinstein, an international steroid smuggler infamously dubbed the Steroid King. This was not a random home invasion. It was an assassination, carried out with chilling precision. The hitmen had done their job without mercy, right in front of the victim's family. It sent a message that no one, not even a so-called king, was safe. And lurking behind that message, prosecutors would later allege, was a man who orchestrated the killing from the shadows. A man who, until now, had kept his name out of the headlines even as violence swirled around him. This is the story of Mark Lifman, a self-styled businessman by day, and by reputation the architect of fear by night, the man accused of ordering the Weinstein hit and many other ruthless deeds. Mark Lifman was once known as a flashy entrepreneur in Cape Town's glitzy nightlife scene. But behind the veneer of respectability, he spent years as an underworld kingpin pulling the strings of organized crime. How did a wealthy nightclub owner become the alleged mastermind of extortion, violence, and murder? And how did it all come crashing down in bloodshed? Mark Lifman was born in 1965 and came of age as apartheid waned and new opportunities, both legal and illicit, emerged in South Africa. By the 2000s, Lifman had established himself as a successful property developer and nightclub owner in Cape Town. He cultivated the image of a suave, controversial businessman, rubbing shoulders with socialites and politicians. To the public, he was a wealthy entrepreneur behind popular clubs and real estate ventures. But on the streets and in gangland circles, Lifman's name carried a more ominous weight. Authorities say he in fact functioned as an underworld facilitator and financier, partnering with gang leaders to run extortion and protection rackets across the city. From the start, Lifman was different from the typical gang boss. He had no obvious gang tattoos, no street nickname like Donkey or Red. He preferred designer suits and high-end cars to the rough trappings of gang life. In media reports, he was often just called an underworld kingpin, but never claimed by any one gang. This relative anonymity was part of his power. He operated in the shadows between the underworld and respectable society. Mark Lifman had one foot in each world. He could negotiate business deals in boardrooms by day and by night, broker deadly deals with gangsters in back alleys. By the mid-2010s, Lifman had aligned himself with some of the most notorious gangs on the Cape Flats. Chief among them were the Sexy Boys, a feared street gang, and factions of the numbers prison gangs, the 27s and 28s, that provided hardened foot soldiers. Lifman himself never led a street gang. Instead, he was the businessman at the helm, leveraging alliances with gang leaders to expand a criminal empire. His closest ally was Jerome Donkey Buisen, the alleged boss of the Sexy Boys gang. Together with a few other powerful figures, including Jerome's brother Colin Buisen and a businessman ally, Andre Naudet, they formed what they proudly called the Brotherhood. Within this brotherhood, Lifman was the financier and strategist, Buisen the gang general, and others brought additional muscle and contacts. By 2016, this coalition of underworld power brokers dominated Cape Town's nightclub security industry, and they intended to keep it that way at any cost. The lifeblood of Mark Lifman's empire was the nightclub protection racket, a lucrative and fear-driven extortion scheme. Under the guise of offering security services, Lifman's group would approach nightclub and bar owners in Cape Town's vibrant entertainment districts. The pitch was simple: hire our security company and pay a regular fee, and your venue will be protected from trouble. The unspoken threat was even simpler: if you refuse, trouble will find you. Those who didn't cooperate risked vandalism, violent assaults on patrons, or worse. As one report later summarized, if the owner refused to pay, they risked violence, vandalism, or loss of business. In other words, pay up or be shut down. To enforce this protection racket, Lifman's Brotherhood wasn't above brute force. Large enforcers, often bouncers with gang affiliations, would be stationed at club doors, a silent reminder to owners and rivals of who really controlled the turf. Violence and intimidation were routine tools of the trade. At first, a broken window or a pointed threat might suffice. If not, the tactics escalated. Former soldiers of the feared 28's prison gang, now working for Lifman, could be dispatched as muscle to make an example of someone. By 2017, witnesses say Lifman's syndicate even had a dedicated hit squad of gang members on standby. These men were ready to carry out arson attacks, beatings, and even assassinations on command. The message was clear. Mark Lifman intended to rule Cape Town's nightlife, and defiance would be met with merciless force. One chilling example came on 9 April 2017, when Lifman's allies orchestrated a show of force that stunned the city. Jerome Donkey Bouisson and Andre Naudet led a convoy of armed men, donned in bulletproof vests, to storm several nightclubs in a single night. Patrons watched in shock as these men barged in, brandishing firearms, ostensibly to check on security. It was a brazen warning to club owners. Lifman's crew could come knocking anytime, anywhere. Police intervened that night before blood was shed, but the message had been delivered. As one club owner put it, the Underworld was letting us know they were in charge. In the wake of these raids, fear spread through Cape Town's nightlife community, the kind of fear that makes business owners look over their shoulder and think twice before saying no to an extortion demand. Behind the scenes, Mark Lifman managed his criminal enterprise like a business, albeit a blood-stained one. He funneled illicit profits into legitimate fronts to launder money. Nightclub revenues, private security firms, property developments, all provided cover for cash flowing in from extortion and drug deals. According to South African tax authorities, Lifman failed to declare vast sums of income and hid his wealth behind shell companies. In 2020, the Supreme Court of Appeal upheld a tax bill against him totaling roughly $388 million, over $20 million, in unpaid taxes and penalties. It was staggering evidence of just how large his empire's profits had grown, and how brazenly he tried to dodge accountability. Lifman fought that case tooth and nail, using high-priced lawyers to stall the asset seizures. For years he seemed untouchable, living lavishly off ill-gotten gains, always a step ahead of the law. But power in the underworld is never uncontested, and Lifman's reign was about to face a deadly challenge. By late 2016, cracks had formed in Lifman's Brotherhood. A new player had risen in Cape Town's underworld, Nafiz Modak, a brash and ambitious crime boss hungry for a piece of the nightclub extortion pie. Modak assembled his own faction, sometimes called the Modak Enterprise, which included corrupt officials and violent enforcers on his payroll. He began courting nightclub owners, trying to muscle into territories long dominated by Lifman's crew. The timing was perfect. One of Lifman's partners, Colin Bouisson, had a falling out with the group and reportedly allied with Modak. Sensing weakness in the Brotherhood, Modak moved aggressively. By November 2016, his men were making plays for clubs under Lifman's protection, igniting a full-blown underworld turf war. What followed was a wave of escalating violence that turned Cape Town into a battleground. At first came fistfights and scuffles as rival security teams brawled outside club entrances. Then came drive-by shootings and attempted hits. In early 2017, Jerome Donkey Bouisson, Lifman's chief ally, survived multiple assassination attempts. He was shot at and wounded on more than one occasion. Each attack was widely believed to be Modak's gunmen trying to take out Lifman's muscle. Each time Bouisson bled, the resolve of Lifman's crew only hardened. In March 2017, as bullets flew and tempers flared, Mark Lifman convened an emergency meeting of his Underworld Council at the Kryfontein home of William Red Stevens, a veteran gang boss in their circle. Red Stevens was another ally, leader of the Americans gang, and he offered his home as a safe haven for the Brotherhood's war council. The atmosphere was tense. These men knew they were in a fight for their criminal empire's survival. According to later court evidence, it was here that Lifman's demeanor turned from businessman to battlefield general. Slamming his fist on the table, Lifman declared they needed at least 200 men, extremely aggressive, to hold their turf against Modak's onslaught. In that moment, the polished nightclub owner revealed himself as a warlord willing to mobilize an army of gangsters to maintain power. They plotted a counteroffensive. The show-of-force raids on the nightclubs in April 2017 were part of that plan, an attempt to intimidate anyone thinking of siding with Modak. But Modak was equally determined. Tit-for-tat attacks continued through 2017. Club owners received terrifying visits from both sides. One by one, people associated with either faction started turning up dead. The violence peaked with the Weinstein assassination in August 2017, the very murder we saw in the opening scene. Weinstein, the steroid king, had allegedly been financing or partnering with Modak's faction in the steroid trade. Eliminating Weinstein would cripple Modak's supply chain and send an unmistakable warning. And so, in the dark of night, a team of hired killers broke into Weinstein's home and executed him in front of his family. It was one of the most brazen contract killings Cape Town had seen, and prosecutors later accused Mark Lifman of being one of its chief architects. The Weinstein murder was a turning point. It intertwined all the key players of Cape Town's underworld in one grim saga: Lifman, Jerome Buisson, Naudet, Red Stevens. They were all named as co-conspirators who had plotted to eliminate a rival and profit from his demise. Indeed, after Weinstein's death, Lifman's group did move into the illicit steroid business that Weinstein had controlled. For a moment, it seemed the Brotherhood had triumphed. Their chief competitor lay dead, and Modak's incursion was blunted. But the victory came at a high price. The audacity of the Weinstein hit drew intense scrutiny from law enforcement. It was simply too public and too gruesome to ignore. The specialized anti-gang unit of the South African police swooped in, like hawks circling their prey, launching sweeping investigations into the underworld figures involved. Seasoned detectives like Lieutenant Colonel Charles Kinnear pored over evidence, determined to bring the puppet masters to justice. By 2018, the net was tightening around Mark Lifman. He had weathered legal storms before allegations of fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion had hounded him for years. But now he faced the most serious charge of all: murder. In late 2017, Lifman was formally indicted for allegedly orchestrating Weinstein's assassination. Jerome Buisson, Naudet, and others were co-accused in what prosecutors painted as a grand criminal conspiracy. Lifman, true to form, managed to avoid jail even after the indictment. He was released on bail and used every legal trick available to delay the trial. For the next few years, he remained a free man, fighting the charges in court while still, by many accounts, running his rackets behind the scenes. Yet even as he battled the justice system, Lifman's underworld world began to crumble. In September 2020, Lieutenant Charles Kinnear, the very detective zeroing in on Lifman and Modak, was assassinated by a car bomb outside his home. That shocking hit was attributed to Nafiz Modak's group, not Lifman's, but it intensified the police crackdown on all organized crime in the Cape. The government could no longer ignore the carnage. Under heavy pressure, police and prosecutors accelerated cases against the city's so-called untouchable crime bosses. Meanwhile, Lifman's allies were being picked off one after another. William "Red" Stevens, host of that 2017 War Council, was shot dead in 2021. Others dropped off or flipped sides. The Brotherhood that once stood invincible was growing thin, and hovering in the streets were whispers that Mark Lifman himself had a target on his back, a bounty rumored at one point to be as high as 10 million rand on his head. Still, Lifman projected confidence. Publicly, he denied being a gangster at every opportunity. He insisted he was just a businessman, and that any links to crime were unproven allegations. In fact, even as multiple indictments and exposés piled up, Lifman fought to maintain a facade of legitimacy. In 2024, while awaiting trial, he went so far as to file a defamation lawsuit against a nightclub owner, Randolph Joburg, who had dared to speak out against him. Joburg's popular bar had resisted extortion demands and suffered brutal retaliation. In 2015, Joburg's head doorman, Joe Louis Canyona, was shot dead during a supposed robbery at the club. Joburg publicly blamed Mark Lifman's network for creating that climate of fear. Rather than lie low, Lifman struck back in court, trying to seize Joburg's property as compensation for the alleged slander. It was a bold, almost unbelievable display of indignation, the accused kingpin suing his accuser, claiming he was the wronged party. but it showed how far Lifman would go to deny the underworld stigma and intimidate his critics. As one observer noted, Mark Lifman sought to combat claims against him in court and maintain a facade of legitimacy, even as evidence of his criminal dealings mounted. 30 November 2024, Garden Route Mall, George. A warm spring afternoon in the Western Cape. Shoppers wander in and out of the mall, arms full of bags, unaware of the hitmen lying in wait. Mark Lifman steps out into the daylight, perhaps on his way to his car. He had come to this smaller city, far from his Cape Town stronghold, possibly to keep a low profile before his next court date. If he was looking over his shoulder, it didn't save him. In a parking area, gunmen ambush Lifman in broad daylight and unleash a hail of bullets. Panicked bystanders dive for cover behind cars. Screams echo as Mark Lifman, the man who once seemed untouchable, collapses to the pavement. In seconds, the assassins speed away, leaving the 59-year-old crime boss bleeding out on the concrete. The businessman of Cape Town's underworld is dead. The hit was as professional as they come. Investigators would later reveal that the killers had stalked Lifman for months, using multiple getaway cars, wigs, and fake license plates to plan the perfect ambush. They struck just one day before Lifman was due back in court for the Weinstein murder trial, a court date he would never keep. Within days, police arrested 2 suspects, Johannes Johnny Hendrik Jacobs and Gert Johannes Bezuidenhout, both charged with carrying out the assassination. It turned out at least one of them was a former member of the police's elite special task force, a highly trained ex-cop now apparently working as a killer for hire. The discovery sent chills through law enforcement. This was not some amateur gang hit. It was a precision contract killing, likely ordered by powerful figures still at large in the underworld. Mark Lifman, who had allegedly ordered so many hits on others, had finally fallen victim to the same law of violence he once exploited. News of Lifman's assassination exploded across South Africa. For years he had been a looming, if enigmatic figure, often described as an underworld kingpin tied to everything from extortion to money laundering. Now he was gone in a burst of gunfire. The hit sent shockwaves through Cape Town's organized crime circles. In the underworld, there was chaos and confusion. Would Lifman's death tear apart the fragile balance of power among gangs? Would there be revenge killings, turf grabs, a full-fledged gang war? Police and communities braced for the fallout, fearing that the assassination would destabilize the underworld's hierarchy. As rumors swirled, some even spoke of that alleged bounty, whispering that the gunman might have been vying for a $10 million reward to take Lifman out. Whether or not such a bounty was real, one thing was clear. Mark Lifman had made plenty of enemies, and one of them had finally caught up with him. In death, as in life, Mark Lifman remained a controversial figure. Crowds did not flood the streets in mourning. There were no state funerals for the businessman who had operated in the shadows. But his killing was not the triumphant end of a villain in a movie. It was messy, alarming, and left many questions unanswered. Who ordered the hit on Mark Lifman? Was it a revenge move by a rival like Modak? A betrayal from within his own circle? Or perhaps a calculated elimination by someone fearing what Lifman might reveal in court? The investigation continued into 2025, but in the code of the underworld, few expected an easy answer. As one detective lamented, witnesses were scarce. What happened next remains a mystery, and those who might know the truth had a way of ending up dead. Indeed, by mid-2025, of the 13 people originally indicted alongside Lifman in the Weinstein murder case, 5 had been murdered in just a few years' span. Lifman's ally, Andre Naudet, was gunned down in June 2025, barely 7 months after Lifman's own demise. One by one, the dominoes were falling. It seemed someone was cleaning house in Cape Town's underworld, systematically eliminating members of Lifman's circle. The streets of Cape Town were soaked in the aftermath of a war that refused to end, even with the ostensible kingpin now 6 feet under. Mark Lifman's rise and fall is more than the saga of one man. It's a window into the dark, precarious world of Cape Town's organized crime. It's a world where fortunes are built on fear, where businessmen and gangsters become indistinguishable, and where violent retribution is the ultimate law. Lifman lived lavishly off the suffering of others. Club owners extorted under threat of death, rivals assassinated in their beds, honest policemen blown up for doing their jobs. Yet, as much as he wielded fear, Lifman also feared for his own life in the end. In his final years, he was often flanked by bodyguards, changing routines, looking over his shoulder. He had good reason. His death proved that even the most powerful can be made a target. For the people of Cape Town, especially those in the crossfire of these underworld battles, the legacy of Mark Lifman is one of haunting repercussions. The nightclub industry he once protected is scarred by years of bloodshed and intimidation. Many who refused to pay were taught brutal lessons. Families like Brian Weinstein's and Joe Canyona's will forever carry the trauma of loved ones lost to the violence Lifman helped unleash. And within the gangs, Lifman's demise has only fueled further turbulence, a reminder that when a kingpin falls, others will scramble violently to claim the throne. Cape Town's underworld remains, in a word, restless. As of mid-2025, Lifman's remaining co-accused, Jerome "Donkey" Buisen among them, continue to face trial delays, as courtroom proceedings are repeatedly upset by assassinations and intimidation. Justice moves slowly, if at all, when defendants and witnesses keep turning up dead. In reflecting on Mark Lifman's story, there is little glory to be found, only caution. He was a man who had wealth, influence, and the ear of dangerous friends, yet he spent his life entangled in brutality and crime. He leaves behind a trail of court cases, grieving families, and a city still grappling with gangsterism. In the end, the businessman who fancied himself untouchable met the same fate he dealt to others. Even the most feared kingpins cannot escape the shadows they cast. Mark Lifman lived by the gun, and ultimately, he died by it, a final, irrevocable proof that in the underworld, the cycle of violence comes for all. His tale stands as a somber lesson. A life built on intimidation and blood will inevitably crumble under the weight of its own sins. Mark Lifman's name may fade, but the wounds of his reign linger in Cape Town's streets. And as the city carries on, one haunting truth remains. In a world ruled by crime and vengeance, the architect of fear often falls by the very architecture he created.